Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. Today I'm excited to be joined by Joe Vest. Joe was actually on my previous podcast, The Hacker Factory, and reached out to him recently, been wanting to get him back on the show. Joe was one of the OG red teamers, and so it'd be good to pick his brain about red team stuff. And then he's also got a book out that we can even discuss. It's been around for a while, but a very useful reference and one that I refer to people a lot when it comes to red teaming. So welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Phillip. It's great to be back and chat again. Last time, some of our passings have been over the pandemic. We had to have some challenges around that, and we were just chatting before. I think we saw each other at DEF CON quickly last year, and that's about the last time we engaged and interacted.
Yeah, one other time previous, I remember right at FutureCon when you were speaking there, and that was like one of the first events after the pandemic, I believe where people started getting out.
At least it was my first one after the pandemic.
Yeah, it was mine as well. And so, it was kind of interesting. At least we got to chat a little bit there, but it's always great to see you and good to catch up, and hopefully we'll run into each other again sometime.
I'm sure we will. It's a small world.
Yep.
We always wind up at some conference or something. And
it's one of the things about the cybersecurity community. It's the best. I've been involved in other communities because I used to compete in powerlifting, so very involved in the fitness and powerlifting community, but nothing just really, my opinion, compares to the cybersecurity community.
Yes, I agree. It's a really, really good community. It's small, and you start to definitely do the Kevin Bacon, 7 steps away from Kevin Bacon, or however that phrase goes. But in cybersecurity, it's the same thing. I see people who know people who know people, and it's a very, very small community.
Yeah. So before we get any further in the conversation, I always have my guests share their hacker origin story. So if you wouldn't mind sharing yours.
Sure. I've been doing this a long time, so I don't really, my hacker origin stories start later in my career because I didn't know hacking was a thing when I started. So I was looking back and going through this process. I can't remember all the things I've ever done. So I actually had to do some homework on myself to help me remember, look through some old resumes and things. So I saw my first job that I had in information technology, because that's what we called it back then. It was IT, just information technology, no cyber in the name at that time. Late 98 was my first job in this technical field. And my job was to replace token rings, network adapters with Ethernet. So I was ripping out token rings. So if anyone knows what that means, then that's a long time ago. But that's where I started in this. So I started in the technical field. When I look at the origins of this, just like many people try to figure out what they want to do in life and they bounce around, I think I went through about 5 or 6 different colleges. I had a full ride to be a forest ranger at one point, and I showed up and I dropped out the day that I went to, on my first day of classes, because it wasn't for me. I actually wound up, if those of you who are around in this time at the 2000 time, the Y2K issue, there was a big boom going on in technology, and I wound up going to a technical school. I dropped out of normal colleges, went to a technical school, went down the normal certification route. Did that for 2 years, got my certifications, and I realized I could get a job. So I actually stopped going to college, dropped out and finished that, and went into the sysadmin world. And I found a huge passion for me in that space. And I really, really love technology, and I dove into it really, really deep to understand how all the things work. So that lasted probably about 7 or 8 years of just doing normal sysadmin work, figuring out how to make things work and run a medium-sized network at the time when I was working there, and did that. And while I was there, I started to learn about security, because your job involves everything at the time. Many people are aware of, you do all the things, and if it touches a network, it's your job, which includes security. I didn't realize that was a separate job, and it sounds a little bit silly, but I went to a conference that was based on the company that I was working for. And I saw someone with these letters, CISSP. And I said, what does that mean? because I didn't know what this was at the time. And I start to learn about it, and I see it was a security. This person was doing a talk on forensics, found it extremely fascinating. Learned what the CISSP was, and I actually spent a year going and studying and learning the CISSP. I thought this was going to be really difficult. I read the yellow book inside and out. I dug through this. I really, really, truly learned everything in there. Finally went and took the test. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed. But I realized I got what I needed, which was really, really diving in and learning some of these core fundamental concepts. And that set me on a path for security. So probably I started doing some things, and I tried to break into security. I mentioned forensics kind of piqued my interest for a little while. But at the time, I found it really difficult to break into security, changing a career field, especially when you're not part of that world. And at the time, forensics was very, very law enforcement heavy. And I just could not break into that. And what I did do, though, was took a couple of SANS classes, learned some of the basics of like security testing. And I really found a passion for application security, like web app pen testing. And I rolled into a job. I convinced someone at a bank to give me a job in GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance. So you can technically say I broke into security doing risk and compliance, probably because of the background I had on leading and running, doing project management, and building out like big, large network systems. While I was at the bank, about a year and a half in, I then convinced the team to let me apply and join their web app pen testing team. And I was terrible at it, but I realized I was better than a lot of people out there, and that was enough. And that gave me the check boxes to move forward and to dive into that area, and then that became my job. So I was able to dive into it. I took all my IT background, I automated a lot of my processes, I built my own tools, I really, streamlined a lot of that whole process. So I was really good at that, and I was learning the application security side and diving into it. And so that was really how I technically broke into security and got into that. During this whole time, I'm still hungry for other things. And kind of a sidebar, I actually tried to join the FBI. I went through the entire process to be a special agent, and I was accepted. It took about just under a year to get through all the entire process to get through this. And I'm at the academy. We're doing some PT stuff, and an old injury comes back. That always, I thought this would happen. So an old injury comes back, and this is never fun, and it's not a quick healing thing. So I decided to let myself just wash out. Felt very defeated, failed at everything. This is terrible. And it gave me this hunger to say, I need to go do something with the government. Now that I couldn't do this, what else can I do? And I found some people at an Army facility, and this is a time when cyber was early phases. This is 2008 to 10, somewhere in that range. Cyber was just starting to come out around, and I would say the DoD lowered the bar from bringing in outside people. So it's hard to break into becoming a government civilian, just like anything else. It usually seems to be you got to be part of the system to be in the system. But I was able to get a job, again, back in the compliance world. So I shifted from application security testing because I wanted to work in the government because I thought there were some interesting things that I was missing, having missed the FBI. And I went to compliance. And then I said, the grass is not always greener when you go somewhere. And sometimes that grass is brown and dirty and nasty. And I learned that compliance in the government was not a place for me. So I stayed there, and I'll just be honest. I'm doing some career advice with my manager at the time. She's like, hey, where do you see yourself in 6 months? And I said, my only goal right now is to last a year so that I can at least say I didn't quit a job in less than a year. And that's just how I felt. It was just miserable. But a buddy of mine was working there and said, hey, there's this team across the street. They're doing this thing called red teaming. And all the stuff that you do with your security background and everything, and what you have, it seems to be right up your alley. And I went and chatted with this team, and it happens to be one of the DoD red teams. So there's a handful of these out there, and I was just right place, right time, really, really hungry for doing security. And I jumped in just really hardcore in that team. And that's where, if you want to say I really broke into security, that's where I actually count where things really changed. I mean, I definitely dove into the application security side, and I actually got pretty decent at that beforehand. And when I went over to the DoD, things completely changed because that opened a door of what we see with red teaming. A lot of people talk about this. And my experience on red teaming was long-term engagements on live production systems. So it wasn't a test system or anything. So I was doing real things for long-term periods. So I really got fortunate enough to get to some experience on gaining it, initial access, holding that access to all the lateral movement, persistence, everything that's needed to actually live and breathe within a well-defined environment. So that's, if I want to count that, that was my place. And it all led up to, honestly, my hunger and drive and constant push for becoming better and pushing myself on that allowed me to be ready when that opportunity arose. That's really what happened. So I did that, and that's really where I started in security, and it's gone further on from there, and I can go through that path. That's really where it happened. So it wasn't a short piece. I mean, I told you I started my work in '99, and I got my first real job, 2000 security job in 2008 to 2010, depending on where you want to count it. So it took a while.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I'm sure whenever you were doing the red team stuff for the DoD, there probably wasn't any kind of red teaming going on outside of the government, I would imagine.
It was definitely less involved. So this was, yeah, a lot of it was just like normal pen testing, security testing. I like to look and reflect on what was out there in the community for training and education. Hans was really big out there doing tons of work in the normal pen testing route. Networking pen testing was huge, and application security testing. So from an offensive security place, there was always the defensive side. Putting that aside, if you look at what was reflected at the time, you're looking at primarily what you could do at Black Hat for type of training, which is usually some sort of pen testing or application security testing. So red teaming really wasn't really happening at the time. And honestly, I disappeared into that world and just really, really learned and honed my craft. And not just hone the craft, I tried to really understand a process, because I'm really big on not just understanding the technology, but how to apply that at scale so that I can repeat it, train other people, learn from other people, and make everything better across the board. So that was interesting. But yeah, you're right. Red teaming wasn't as common outside of the government.
So while we're on the topic of red team, there's so many times that it gets generalized nowadays. Some people consider, is another term for offensive security. They'll say red teaming instead of offensive security, and people get confused with the definition. So for our listeners, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing the difference between red teaming and pen testing.
So I'm going to take a different stance on that, because I have been doing this for, what is this, 2025? So 15 or so years of some sort of offensive security related pieces, red teaming, pen testing, all of these things. I even wrote a book, as you mentioned. I did that book. That book was based off of the first SANS course on red teaming that myself and my buddy wrote. So we've had a lot of influence into the red team communities. We've tried to establish this. I actually don't like to use the word anymore, and that sounds terrible to say, but what I happen to see is we get into these conversations and debates about definitions and terms, and that doesn't really help what we're doing. So when I look at red teaming, pen testing, vulnerability assessment, some sort of evaluation of some sort of security stance, I generally just call these security tests now. I just say we're going to do some security testing. So I actually like to walk backwards from the problem you're trying to solve. So someone might say, I need a red team, I need a pen test. That's fine. Those are words that we're not going to argue and debate and put too fine a point on. Well, you were given privileged access, or you were given this, or you ran Nmap. So clearly it wasn't a red team because you weren't being covert, or some weird sillinesses that I feel like sometimes we hurt ourselves in the industry with some of our enthusiasm of, where those lines are. So I actually prefer to say, let's figure out the goal that you're trying to do. So if your goal, someone says, I need a red team and I want you to find all the vulnerabilities on my, endpoints. Well, you could argue that maybe that's a good goal. Maybe the client or who's ever asking thinks that's a red team, but I would not normally look at that. I would say the goal is to identify vulnerabilities and risks associated with that population of systems. And if we choose to put a label on it, we can. And maybe perhaps you change that, you put that label as vulnerability assessment, or perhaps you want to have something else. You're looking for like the validation of all those flaws. And if we need to put some definitions on things, and I want to put this, so I don't want to just avoid the question, although I tend to in the real world because it doesn't lead anywhere. But my normal way of looking at red team or pen testing, if I walk away from vulnerability assessments, are to identify all of the risks within a set of systems of your target environment. Penetration testing is validation of those. So you're looking for, I just usually boil this down to is attack path validation. So this is what you're looking for. I have some I tend to look this in terms of mitigations. In other words, if I did this thing called a vulnerability assessment, a pen test, a red team, you're going to get some sort of result and you're going to apply mitigations. That's really what we're caring about. So you want to look at that. So in a pen test, the mitigations are usually around this is open, this is a flaw, this is bad credentials, something. And the mitigations are around reducing your attack surface. So I typically put pen tests or attack path validation with the goal of reducing your attack surface. This is where I put these in together. I'm not reading, I have actual written definitions. I'm not reading them. I just want to I like to be able to vocalize them simple and quick. And then when you get into red teaming is, you can almost look at, you can't have red without blue. So red teaming is the validation of all the instantiated security controls that you put into an environment. I typically put this, and it's a little cliche now, but it's to understand the people, processes, and technology you've built and deployed to defend an environment. So while a pen test might say, this flaw exists, I can click this, I can gain access here, and I can pivot to this from weak creds or stolen creds, and I have, root shell on something. That is not enough. That tells you the attack path is possible. But a well-defended environment has people that are in there. You have tools that are there, not just for preventative, but detective controls. So now you're looking at measuring everything, which includes your detections and your response, your ability to do this. So some people say you can't have red teaming unless you're measuring the defenders or the blue team. I tend to just like to say we are analyzing and measuring the ability to defend based on what you've instantiated, people, processes, and technology. That's generally where I have. But even when I explain this, I go back to, we're just going to do some security test. Let's define what goals you want, and then we can label it later. It's much, much better approach than arguing on pen test versus red team. As someone who has a book called Red Teaming, it's back on my shelf over here, and so I go, but that's part of learning. You learn and grow and you change and you try to work with how the world understands what we're trying to do from this, what we generally call offensive security.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it, because I worked at an organization once that someone wanted red teaming done against an SAP app, and you just don't do that, but they didn't understand the terminology. But the way you define it, that's a really good way, because if someone was consulting with him to do this exercise, then this assessment, they could go ahead and just do it as whatever labeled as such and not help them reach their goals. So it just seems like that, people on the offensive security side need to really make sure they're doing what you're doing and really clearly defining those goals.
Yeah, that is how I've found it to be the best. And whether you're an internal person doing it for an internal company or you're an external consultant, you're really a consultant in all of these factors. Sometimes you're assigned a role if you're an internal, and sometimes you're working with a company who says, I want X type of test. I need a pen test. I need a red team. But if you just end it there and you don't ask those probing questions, you're not going to understand what's going on, because it really all comes down to what is the goal. And then I like to take that, not just say what's the goal, what do you want to do with the results? So if you put this in context of what mitigations do you want to apply, then it's not just the goal, but it's the goal is almost like the means to the end. You're really looking for that end. So I say, what do you want to do with this information after we conduct this assessment, this test? And that'll help you drive what this is. And then you can label it what you want. Like, I'm not going to be, some people might want to say, well, I have to have a red team because of compliance or XYZ reason. Fine, call it a red team engagement. I'm not going to be too pedantic on that. But I do often see us in our community, this tight-knit community, have arguments and discussions on red teaming. Go on the social medias and look at that. Just throw out some definitions and watch what happens. It's fun. It's almost as very similar to the OST, the offensive security tooling debate. So very, very still, they can be spicy topics.
So since you've been in this for a while, a long time, and the red teaming side, so how are things changed since you kind of started, and kind of what are you doing different these days?
So, well, a couple of things. What I've seen change is the core fundamentals have not changed. You're still analyzing a system, utilizing the information you have about that piece of technology. in order to achieve some sort of a goal. So you still play with understanding how, you're looking at how protocols are operating, how the communications are operating, how the endpoint systems are responding to all these environments. Whether they were more of a classic on-premise, say a Windows network environment, or maybe some sort of like fully cloud-baked environment. The means to those, the actual technical things that you do are different, but overall goal, you're still doing the same thing where you are attempting to manipulate some piece of the flow of how this information is and violate those security assumptions. That's really all we're doing. You're trying to violate these to achieve some sort of goal that is what a threat would do. Steal information, cause havoc, whatever those goals are. So when I see what changes is the core principles have not. And if you apply really, really strong approaches to, I'll just call it red teaming for now, to this process, then you can do that. And then it's just a matter of understanding technology. If I look back at my old red teaming career, especially when I was in the government, you're exposed to all kinds of weird things, technologies that I've never used. And I didn't say, well, I don't know that technology. I don't know that protocol. I would have to go and learn that technology. I'd have to reverse engineer protocols. I'd have to understand what options there were to manipulate and circumvent security defensive assumptions. And that's what this whole thing is about. So there's assumptions that were built in a well-defined environment. You're trying to circumvent those, whether that means you do it through a technical means or through social engineering means. There's a lot of ways to do this. Again, how do you manipulate the people, processes, or the technology in order to achieve that goal? So none of that has really changed. The biggest changes that I've seen are shift from more cloud dependencies. So the actual means to what you can do is different, where you can also look at the buzzword of like identity is now the new boundary. So now you can think of the whole classic, my firewall protects me. Now you're looking at identity management is key to everything because everything is connected and protected through identity management. So various identity management systems are the major attack surface. So that is changed. I mean, it's changed, but it's also never been not the case. But now it's just cloud-based instead of maybe on-prem because, if you're an on-prem, like say a Microsoft Windows Active Directory environment, you're still going after the identity management system. It just happens to be local AD versus these cloud providers who have various implementations.
Interesting. So what new things have you learned? How are you doing your assessments these days? Are there anything that you're doing different to make your job more easy or?
So this is my diversion question. So I made a career change about a year ago, and I left the offensive security, red teaming, and pen testing side of the world, and I shifted to the defensive side. I got to a point in my career that I said I'm poking at everyone, saying this is bad, here, fix this. To where I realized you can fire a lot of problems at people, but do you have basically as a personal challenge, do you have the chops and capability to go experience what it's like on the blue side, the defensive side? Primarily for the last year, I've been focusing on the data and the telemetry side of things. That is the precursor for detection engineering. So basically, in order to capture all the data needed for conducting like an IR response or building out detections needed so that you can actually do something against this. So I've actually spent more time on this. So I've actually really, really tried to push my threat perspective and understanding of how the adversaries do things and apply that to the defense. So honestly, a lot of what I do now is translate the assumptions that defenders have, because I've learned that defenders are extremely smart about what they're doing, the data, what they're having, how to dive into everything, but they don't always understand the techniques or what a threat would or would not do. So there's still some misconceptions about where to push your resources and where to push back against the adversary. Some of the things we learn through whether college, through SANS, or other things, some of those can be a little more generic and may not actually push back against the threat actors in ways we want, or where we may not collect the right data that we need. So, there's often times like, I collected all the logs. Well, what logs do you have? Are they actionable? Did you actually turn on all of the components needed to do auditing of this piece? So what I find is a strong detection engineering approach that dives into the technical aspects of issues or allows you to walk backwards and figure out the telemetry. On that note, A lot of what I've been doing, honestly, you could call it like DevOps or spending time at scale, learning the challenges and difficulties of collecting data at scale. It's been pretty eye opening. On the red side, the pen test side, it's like, hey, you didn't detect this. You should just detect it. Why don't you detect it? And it seems so easy and trivial. What you just go click the detect this bad thing button. And it's not that easy because you start to learn of scaling issues and data issues and how much data you to collect. So it becomes a really, really interesting challenge. So honestly, the last year has been more of a helping educate our teams who collect data and also to learn how this is done at scale.
So has that kind of helped you kind of reignite your passion for security, doing something different?
Yes, it definitely does because and we can get into like career advice and things if we need to, but sometimes you need to have something, you need to change. I have spent so much time in the offensive security space and I really, really like it. After I left the government, I started my own company and ran that for 3 or 4 years. And that was really tough. I was working way too many hours, traveling 70, 80% of the time. It was rough. And then we were like, okay, how do we scale this? And this actually, myself and our partner who ran this company were looking for options, and we knew some people over at Spectre Ops when they were first starting. And we chatted with them early on, primarily through my relationship with Raphael Mudge, the person who wrote Cobalt Strike, made some introductions. And we started this early when they first started, and then within 9 months of them forming, we brought our whole company over. So we merged with Spectre Ops about 9 months into their existence. So they had their first initial 10 or 12 people, and then I brought 4 people with us. So we merged that, and I was with Spectre Ops, helping run a lot of that, helping grow that company for another 3 or 4 years. That entire process really, really being in the consulting world just personally burned me out. I loved everything. I loved all the people. I still communicate and keep in touch with all the people I worked with at Spectre Ops. It's just it burned me out. That led me to make a change to go back to the corporate side. And then during that time frame, I was still in the security testing side. And I think I just needed this next move to finish that transition in my career to where I was testing in the consulting side, testing in the internal side. And I really needed to say, okay, can I really help make things better? Instead of just calling everything bad and pointing at everything and firing tickets to go make corrections. Do I actually have the ability to do this? So I'll be honest, I'm still in the middle of this and I have bad habits of wanting to test and break everything I see. It's only been just about a year now since I've made that change. So it's been fun, but more of a personal career thing than anything needed. I still live through all my red team fun through my peers and friends, just seeing them at conferences or just chatting with what they're doing. So it's good. That's enough for me right now.
That's good. So was it kind of hard to make the switch after doing red teaming so long?
It was scary, very scary to do, but I had a lot of conversations with people and looking at what was going on. So I'd say the first 6 months of this transition was more, I was basically an internal consultant translating how threats operate, working with threat intel teams, working with some blue teams to say, this is how things work. Let's go look at your backlog of detections and things you need. Let's go tune those to fit what's needed. So I actually acted more of a consultant. And then the last 6 months or so, it's more of a telemetry side. Now I'm diving into the telemetry, various toolings to say, okay, how do we actually collect these logs? Whether it's an in-house built solution or external solution, this is my approach now to help with security.
So just out of curiosity, since you kind of made the switch, you've been in the industry for a long time, because I've seen cases where it seems like the blue team side might pay better in general. I don't know. So what is that like? What are the opportunities like on the blue team side compared to offensive security?
I would say the opportunities are there. Security is still booming. Everyone needs people, and it does go up and down in cycles based on markets and such, but you can't have just unlimited testers. Someone's got to go do the other work. So I have never looked at numbers, but I would say, for every person you have testing, you need at least 1 or 2 or more people doing the work on the other side to respond to that. So I can't see a company saying, hey, we'd like you to come test all of our stuff, and then no one is there to fix it or defend it. And so I haven't actually gone out there to see what the market is on the blue space across the board, but I always know people in the industry who are always hiring. I still, like I said, I keep up with like Spectre Ops and some of the other, I call it boutique companies out there. They always have a pipeline to bring people in. And then on the internal side for companies, I'm in several like internal Slack channels and stuff that I watch, and there's always postings, and they tend to go with the general market out there in the world. Sometimes things compress a little bit and everyone slows down, and then when hiring opens back up, everyone's openings. It's always the tech field is ready to hire always when the markets allow it. So it's been good. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this. Oh my gosh, 25 years. Saying that out loud is so terrible. I've been doing, some sort of technology role for 25 years, and I've been fortunate enough to keep myself in a pretty decent position. But that has been very active. I is not being complacent. It's being very active and pushing constantly. So it's not easy to always push, but I've learned you have to keep pushing yourself and be enthusiastic about what you're doing.
So I think along the lines of that, why don't we kind of shift the conversation over to career advice, because people are always looking for good career advice, and it's always interesting to hear some of other people's point of view. Because I know when we had a discussion, I don't even know it was on the podcast, I think it was at FutureCon, on kind of your opinion on whether people need to actually work in some area of tech before going into offensive security, and I believe you thought they should. So I don't know if is that still your opinion, or I don't know, I may have got that wrong, but.
So I guess whether you work somewhere or not prior, you have to understand the technology and the components that build that technology before you can test it. And if that means you need to work as a builder, creator, runner to build, deploy these things, then you'd need to do this. But if you don't understand this, then you're not going to do very well. Like if you don't understand, like if you're doing application security testing and you don't understand how coding works, you don't understand how, say, web APIs are working, how HTTP protocol works, firing up burp or some automated tool is not going to help you very much. Same thing where if you're going back to traditional internal networks, like on-prem networks, if you don't understand core operating systems, how they work, how they communicate, you're not going to get very far, or you're going to be limiting yourself based on what you learned in some class, which is really, really small. The classes, any courses you take are going to be exposing yourself to a small piece of some of the technology, but you've got to dive in and really understand how all of these things work. And for me, coming from some sysadministration background, I had to learn everything from the core OSs to the entire how they communicate over a server environment, all the protocols that are involved in all of these things, the networking stack, how all of these fundamental core technologies work. I still see people who don't understand, routing and switching. And I'm not saying you're going to always need these things, but these building blocks really help you understand how technology functions. Specifically to red teaming, again, red teaming is analyzing technology and understanding how you're going to violate those security defenses, whether they're intentional or just nature of design of the environment. If you don't understand how things work, you're not going to get very far in coming up with creative ways of abusing those systems. So I find it strange that we see a lot of people go through courses on security and they learn things. I have hit or misses on people who do this. Now, sometimes you can be really, really good if you can find a niche in security to dive into a single area to where you might really understand that, but you don't understand everything around you. And I guess there's a place for that, but I don't want to ever be a gatekeeper that says you must do all these other things before you can come to security. But if I was hiring you and you were going through my interview, it would definitely be around understanding what you do or do not know about the fundamentals of how technology works in the area that you're going to be testing. You have to have those fundamental knowledges of how things work. In other words, I feel like you need to know how to build something or manage those things before you can really analyze the security of it.
And so you kind of mentioned that. So, if you were hiring someone and they had the education, maybe they took some courses, maybe not had the real world professional experience, would you consider someone that's been taking courses, building a home lab, doing things like hack the box to gain those skills? Would you consider people like that?
Yeah, that gets into, I'd say, trying to be a competent interviewer and understanding how to extract those things. So you're looking for, especially, this is the whole breaking in, especially early days. It's hard to break into anything. So what are you doing to distinguish yourself? What is your passion? So when you lack the technical experience, maybe, or job experience, where are you getting your technology? Where are you spending your weekends? I'm not going to say everyone had to do this, but I did not have a social life in my early 20s. I worked. When I was going through school and going through everything, I drove a forklift for working 4 days a week. 3 days on the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then their week, I was going to learn and train and do some school. I did that. I didn't have any off days, and that's what I did. And that's how I put myself into a position I could do something. And then I would learn a technology and build my own home lab and try to dive into that thing that I learned. It's like, oh, what is this? Like, I went through the application security side. What is SQL injection? What is cross-site scripting? What does that really mean? Because I wanted to know not just surface level, but to actually dive in to understand how this worked. So that's the kind of things you look at when you're trying to interview someone. So if someone's doing like a hack the box or some sort of CTF or some sort of that, those are really helpful. And my approach to that is to chat with them about, give me an example of how you've walked through one of these challenges. What did you do? What did you find? What tools did you use? What tools did you build and create? Because I would argue that if you haven't built or created any tools to solve a problem, you might need to go work on that, because everyone should have some sort of tool, script, something, enhance their ability to achieve some goal.
And so it would be kind of a missed opportunity if we didn't discuss your red team book.
Sure. That kind of, if I take a step out on the story, I was doing the DoD red teaming stuff, and one of the big things that I had a passion for was processes around red team. I'd say the boring side of red teaming. When I saw what distinguished a good red team versus a bad one, it usually wasn't technical. It was discipline around approach to targeting something, collecting the logs that were needed, and transferring those logs into a well-written report. That's really what it came down to, because when you've done all the work and it's cool hacking stuff and you've done a lot of stuff, when you're presenting this, no one's there with you. They didn't do the hack. Might get boiled down to a few lines and says, oh yeah, we found a password and we did this. And that finding a password or cracking a password or gaining access to some target system, that was a means to an end. From a technical side, it's amazingly fun to break the thing, but then you just throw that away and you gotta pivot to the next thing. So the book came out because I chatted with Sands, in this case with Ed Scotus, and said, hey, Ed, I'd like to propose a red teaming book. And this was in a time where red teaming concepts were starting to bubble up, but no one was doing this. We had a few red teaming courses and stuff out there, but it was all technical. I actually did propose the full technical course, but Sands was like, let's just do a 2-day course. So I said, okay, this is going to be red team management, if you will. So my thought process behind this was to say, what does it take to run and operate a professional red team? And that was the entire premise of what we did. So myself and my friend James, we wrote this book, wrote the course material for Sands, and I taught it for about 2 years. And it was a really, really successful 2-day course. But going through that process, running my own company and trying to break into Sands, because as a 2-day course author, I wasn't really getting the cred I needed to become a full certified instructor. And I was busy doing my course versus trying to teach other courses. So it just did not work out, unfortunately. So I did leave Sands after about 2 years. And that was all our material that we wrote. So James and I said, hey, we're going to release this into a book. I will be honest, we wrote that book before Sands could take the course and continue on because they had the right to continue it on, and they did continue it, and some other good people took it on. But we wanted to have the book out beforehand just to make sure that our name had the stamp on it. And we did this, and this is last month. It's been out for 5 years. And I never thought I'd be an author. We tried to make this a practical guide on what you can do for red teaming. Now, there's some stuff dated, and because we did self-publishing, in some ways you could argue it's a bit scrappy. So we've had some comments around like, hey, this is weird, or maybe there's some misspelling, or there's some grammar things in there. Yeah, that's true. But James and I put this together after the course. Now, the course took a long time, but we put the book together in about 4 months. And it worked really, really well. And I personally claim it as a success because I've had many, many people come back to me and said, hey, this book helped. they've formed their red team based off of this, or they've hit me up on social media to chat about things, and it's opened doors and conversations around, what does it take for professional red teaming? So it's been great. I do need a new revision, but writing a book is a lot, and I haven't signed myself up to do that again. But yeah, it all came from me wanting to teach professional red teaming to the world, and I got to do that for 2 years, and then we got to put the book together.
Oh, very cool. So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to mention before we end the episode?
Sure. Well, I used to teach all the time, and I like to use aphorisms and sayings to describe things. And one of the things I always tell people, if you're getting into security testing, that's important, and it's a lesson everyone learns. You're really enthusiastic, you find this cool bug, you find some problem, and no one listens to you. And it's frustrating. So there's two parts to this. One, the joy and enjoyment you have out of your job needs to be for yourself. Others may not have enthusiasm, or other things may happen to where no one takes action on what you have. So I say you need to just high five the person next to you and be good at and be comfortable with that, because not everyone is going to take action on what you have. And this gets into my other phrase is, as a security tester, we don't have our own playground. We are invited to come to someone else's playground. We can bring our toys, we can have the cool stuff. We can actually be the best and fastest person on that playground, but it's not our playground. So we've got to play by their rules. My advice is, when you're going to this playground, you have two choices. You can take your toys and go home, find some other playground, but you're still someone else's playground. Or you can play, follow those rules, and then gain trust with that the people who own that playground to try to change the rules and modify it and make it a better place. I recommend both options, because you do have to recognize when you need to back away and change, because some places were not willing to change. But the other side is, when you can make change, it's much better. Just realize that not everyone's going to listen to you, and you do have the ability to change the rules to that playground, but it is never going to be your playground. You're always an invited guest. So keep that mental model in your head that you need to be respectful and really, really help drive improvements versus just calling everyone's baby ugly.
Yeah, that's great advice. I like the analogies that you use with that. That's a good way to describe it. So I appreciate you taking time to join me today, and it's great catching up with you.
It's great chatting. Always great chatting.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.